Now, shearing day is one of the biggest days on a fiber farm because it's when your entire year's worth of work comes to fruition and you get to see those beautiful fleeces that you and your animals grew over the last year. So whether you are shearing yourself or hiring a shearer, these are just some things that are handy to have on hand and how to make sure your animals are ready for the big day. Now, shearing is one of the trickiest days to film because it's an all hands on deck sort of day. So it's very seldom that we have someone that is exclusively there to film and doesn't have any other responsibilities. And when I used to shear myself a few years ago, I was usually just by myself, and it's really tricky to film and shear an animal at the same time. So I've always had very limited shearing content compared to what actually happens behind the scenes. Just because even when I'm hiring a shearer, I'm usually out there either handling animals or grabbing fleeces or doing various other tasks, and I don't have my hands free to hold a camera or to get one set up in the right position. And the shearer is not going to orient themselves in a perfect way to get in the camera or that kind of thing. So it's just tricky, but enjoy some of these clips from our shearing days and what it can look like if you're doing it yourself or hiring a shearer. I have had fiber animals for 10 years now, and we also have Angora goats, which are shorn twice per year, which means I have facilitated over 20 shearing days on our farm. And these are some of the supplies and the prep that I find the most useful to get it done efficiently. So first, when animals are shorn, they need to be completely dry. So if you are getting some kind of rain or inclement weather and your animals might be wet, they do need to be indoors prior to shearing. This can be tricky if you don't have a big barn or some other way to keep the animals dry, but it is really, really important that those fleeces are dry when the animals are shorn. So even getting wet from dew in the morning can affect the shearer's blades and either make the shearing not go well. The clippers can't cut through the wool, or it means that your fleeces could potentially mold in storage. Now, sheep should also be fasted overnight if you are shearing where the sheep are set back on their rumps. Now, if you're shearing on a stand and the sheep is going to be upright the entire time, this isn't necessary to fast your sheep and they can have water and food as usual. However, if they're going to be tipped up on their rumps, it's really uncomfortable for the sheep to have full stomachs. So it's really important to withhold food and usually water for a few hours, especially if it's hot. You don't want to do water for an extended period. And if you're hiring a shearer, they will often have specific guidelines for this. So each shearer will request how long they want your animals to be fasted. This includes hay, grain, pasture or grass, and occasionally water. So anything that they can eat. So if you put them in a little pen that has a bunch of grass, they're going to be eating that grass. Make sure they are in a stall with nothing to eat or in a dry paddock. They should also be penned in a small, easy to catch area. This is super important because once it's shearing day, your shearer or yourself do not want to be chasing animals around. It's going to make you stressed out, it's going to make them stressed out, and it's going to waste a ton of time. So make sure they're in a small pen or stall so that your shearer or yourself can grab them very quickly. I've even heard shearers say that they will leave if they show up if they're running around a large pasture. So you do not want your shearer to leave on you. It's hard enough to get shearers there on the day as is. It's also helpful to have a separate area where you plan to send animals after shearing. So you can have one pen for your animals pre-shearing and then another pen or pasture nearby for them post-shearing. I like to have the gate for where the animals are going post-shearing to be right next to the shearer's area, because then all I have to do is open the gate and push the sheep through, and the sheep's happy to run away from the shearer and be off on its own. So that just really helps the flow go much smoother and quicker. Also, if your animals are not halter trained, it can take a lot of time to try to move some of these big 200-pound animals if they're going somewhere they do not want to go. It's also really helpful if the area where the animals are penned before shearing is also close, So if you can have the doors like right next to each other, so your shearer can just grab one animal, shear it, and then push it out the gate to the next pasture, that makes a super streamlined process, which is really helpful. Again, if you're doing it yourself, you can go a little bit slower, especially if you're doing like 1 or 2 animals a day. You don't have to have this perfect setup, but the more animals and the less time, the easier it is to have a streamlined process like this. Now, for your shearing area setup, you want to have some kind of surface that is flat and easy to sweep. So after the fleece comes off, there are going to be a bunch of little extra bits of hay, different dirty that you don't want in your fleeces. So I would recommend having something like plywood or concrete that is easy to sweep, and also have a broom. If you want your shearing day to not be weather dependent, then make sure you also have a covered area where you can shear that's protected from wind and rain. And if it's a hot day, it's just really nice too to be under a little bit of shade. But also make sure that it is well lit, because shearing is a job where it is helpful to see what's going on. So make sure that you have good lighting. If you are going to be using electric shears, and if you hired a shearer, they will usually request electricity access and often extension cords as well. So make sure you have those on hand ahead of time so you're not scrambling the morning of. Of course, if you are shearing, you're going to need some kind of shears. Make sure that you're familiar with these ahead of time and how they work. If you're hiring a shearer, they will bring their own equipment. You do need supporting supplies on the fleece end and any of the sheep and facility setup, but they will bring their own shearing supplies. So if you're using electric, you need your shears and clippers. Make sure they're cleaned and oiled ahead of time. And also make sure that you have extra clipper oil and a screwdriver for adjustments or any minor fixes that you may need to do day of. Do you see the sheep? It looks like Agnes. If you are shearing on a stand, make sure that you have a shearing stand ahead of time. You can buy these, or you can also make them. A shearing stand, you may also find it under something like a milking stand if you're searching for one to buy. Halters or leads for handling sheep are also helpful to lead them around, or if you need to keep one tied for short periods. If you don't have a stand available and you don't want to tip the sheep on their rumps, you can use a halter to tie them up, but I wouldn't recommend this for more than 1 or 2 animals because it's going to get super fiddly. Now, if you have super calm animals and you only have a couple that are used to this process, it may go better, but not if you have a mid to large size flock. Make sure you have a broom or brush to clean the floor of your shearing area between sheep. It's also helpful if you go lightest to darkest, because if some of those light fibers get mixed in with a dark fleece, it's not as big of a deal as if some of the dark fibers get mixed in with lighter fibers. A first aid kit is helpful to have on hand both for the animals and for yourself if anyone gets nicks. However, if sheep get very small nicks, it's usually best to just leave them on their own, because the lanolin in their coat is actually really good to heal skin, and you do not want to interfere with that healing process. That happens very quickly. Finally, to handle the fleeces, make sure that you have plastic bags. Something like 40 or 50 gallon bags are usually helpful. Clear plastic trash bag. Also have a marker or labels to keep your fleeces straight. You will think you remember them, but after it's done, it's really tricky to remember whose fleece belongs to who, especially if the day was going fast when you have a lot of animals. Now, if you only have a couple and they're different colors, that's a little bit different, but it's still really helpful to label them with the animal, and at the very least, I like to do the animal and then also the shearing year or date. Now, if you are doing shearing yourself, you'll probably do skirting later. However, if you have a big team, skirting usually happens day of. A little bit of this will happen while the shearer is shearing the sheep. If they see something immediately that's just not good, they're going to throw it to the side. But after the fleece comes away from that shearer, it's helpful to have some kind of clean surface or a skirting table that has slats in it to allow debris and second cuts to fall through. So if you have a big team and you have enough people, it's really helpful to get that skirting done all at once, because then you have fleeces that have been skirted and they're ready for the next step, either to sell them or to scour them. or to send to the mill. Shearing day is super exciting. It is fun it's enjoyable to see those fleeces finally come off the animals and be able to see the wool you have worked so hard for over the last year. And it's also really useful to see the animals and what they look like because you get to see the true body condition of the animal. You can usually get a good sense of it when they have a heavy fleece, but you can't really see everything until that fleece is off. So it's really useful to get a good assessment of your animals. And if you're doing this yourself, I really enjoy having my hands on each animal for an extended period of time, learning their body, learning the way that they interact with me, and really getting a good feel for the animal. Grab this list in the description below, and you will be all set for your shearing day. If you find this checklist helpful, I have many more resources and videos like this in my online Barn to Yarn course that will show you exactly how to get started with fiber animals and how to have a successful fiber farm. You can check that out in the description below. Please reach out to me if you have any questions.